right, I'm very excited. Happy to introduce our speaker for this morning. He's going to be teaching our Bible class this morning. He's also going to be speaking for us in the worship hour as well. We have Andrew Young here with us. You might remember him. I think it was about 3 years ago that he was last here with us and kind of reported. He was getting ready to go to Australia then, and has done a great work there the last several years. He is at the Gip Street Church of Christ in Toowoomba. Is that right? I don't know if I said that right, but in Toowoomba. And I'm sure he's going to tell us more about that. But he and his wife Hannah, they have 3 daughters, and they're just doing a great job. And we're so thankful to have him here with us this morning. So Andrew, I'm going to give the rest of the time to you.
Good morning, brethren. Thank you so much for having me here today. It's a real privilege to be here. It's a little strange, to be honest, to be back in semi-familiar places where I've visited with you guys 3 years ago. I spent some time with you, and I'm seeing some familiar faces. I'm sorry if I don't always attach the right name to the right face, but it's certainly good to be here and good to see you all this morning. I also want to thank you for the support that you've given to me and my family and to my work over the last 3 years. We greatly appreciate the prayers, we greatly appreciate the support, and all that you've done for the work in Australia. So we certainly appreciate you and appreciate what you've done in all that. As Andy mentioned, my name's Andrew. I am an Australian, and I am working in Australia. I was born in Hobart, Tasmania, which is that little island just off the south of Australia. I lived there my whole life until I decided I was going to get into the ministry. I decided I was going to get into the work of the church, and I came over to Knoxville, Tennessee. I studied at the Southeast Institute of Biblical Studies. I prepared myself for mission work there, and then after that I've returned to Australia, and that's where I now work. I want to introduce you to my family. There we are up on the screen. We'll get a bit closer here. This is the Young family. This is us on Australia Day. So we have an Australia Day. You can tell we love our country. We're very patriotic and proud people in Australia. Australia Day is on January 26th, and it is basically, well, in some ways, it's very similar to your 4th of July, but in other ways, it's actually the opposite of the 4th of July. It's very similar in the 4th of July in that we celebrate it the same way. We'll have a grill, we'll put some snags on the barbie, as we would say in Australia. We get the Australian flag out, we get the face paint and all that, and we just enjoy the sun outside. But it is the opposite to July the 4th in that we celebrate Australia Day on January 26th because that is the day that the first fleet of the British arrived and started the colony of Australia. We were established as a penal colony. So we celebrate when the British came, you guys celebrate when the British left, right? So a few differences there. So this is the family. There on the end there is my wife. That's Hannah. Next to her is the oldest. That's Vivian. She's 7 years old now. She's in school and she's loving it. Right in the middle there, that's our youngest, Evelyn. If you remember us from 3 years ago, she was just a baby when we arrived. We actually had her while we were studying at the school at Knoxville. So she's our little Tennessee souvenir right there that we brought home with us. And then next to her is Olive. That's our second child, and that ugly mug on the end, that's me. We also have an exciting announcement. Number 4 is on the way, and guess what? It is another girl. So 4 girls. That's so I said I appreciate your prayers. I ask that you continue to keep me in your prayers. So we're the Young family, and in this presentation what I want to do is I want to talk about our work in Australia. I want to talk about what we've been up to for the last 3 years, the work we're currently doing, and I also want to talk about some of our plans for the future. I do want to make this fairly interactive. I've got some material to get through, but if you guys have a question, please pop your hand up. I'd really appreciate any interaction, any questions you have, and yeah, happy to answer them if I can. So we are working in Australia. We're working in Australia, and I say that because our mission field is not just the Gipp Street Church of Christ, it's not just Toowoomba, it's not just the southeast Queensland area. The mission field is Australia. A major part of our work is not just in one locale, it's not just one little area. What we are trying to do is we are trying to help and strengthen the church in Australia. I'll talk a little bit about some of the statistics in a little bit, but if you recall in my last visit, I spoke briefly about Australia and some of the statistics of the church there. It is a very small church, and what we're trying to do is we are trying to strengthen the church in Australia, get more workers into this exciting field. Australia is a country that is similar in size to the USA. So as far as landmass goes, very, very similar in size to I think you call it the 48 states. You know, exclude Alaska, exclude Hawaii, they don't count. Just the USA is very similar in size to Australia. But we have less than 10% of the population because Australia is, it's a fairly wild place. It's a bit of a crazy place, and in the middle of it, there's this massive desert that is mostly uninhabitable. We can't really use most of the country of Australia. So most people live along the coast. That's where most people are in Australia. It's a diverse landscape. We've got beaches, rainforests, deserts, and mountains, and large sections of the country are an uninhabitable desert. The church in Australia is very small. So, you know, we've got a fairly small population, 28 million people in Australia altogether. As far as the church goes, we have 1,700 members of the Church of Christ in Australia. I'd imagine you'd probably have maybe even more than that in Chattanooga alone, of 1,700 members of the Church of Christ. But we have that in the entire country. There are about 75 congregations, and I wouldn't necessarily call Australia anti-religion. I wouldn't say that if you go to Australia and you talk about religion, you're going to get ridiculed or persecuted or anything like that. I would call it a culture that is apathetic towards religion. They just don't care. They're very... we used to do a bit of door knocking. We'd knock on some doors and we'd ask people questions like, what do you think happens after you die? What do you think happens after we die? Do we go to heaven? Do we go into nothing? What happens? Most people I've found, if we do door knocking in the USA, they've got an answer. They've got a thought, at least, of what they think happens after they die. In Australia, most people will say, I don't know. I guess we'll find out when we get there. Or something along those lines. They just don't care to think about those sorts of things. It's a very apathetic culture towards religion. If we're going to do a bit of comparison here, I'm going to use the United States as the comparison because that's what we know here. In the United States, you'd have 64% of the population claiming some sort of religion. 64% would, oh sorry, no, that's Christian. 64% would claim that they are Christian. In Australia, that's 44%. So a little bit smaller there, not dramatically. So 64% in the States, 44% in Australia. But in the USA, if you ask people not just, well, are you a Christian? If you ask them, do you attend a church service regularly? How many in the USA do you think that number would be? What, as a percentage, how many Americans would say, I attend church regularly? I'm going to throw this one out to you guys, see what you guys know about the... What was that, sorry? 30%, that's it. Somebody's done his homework, he's researched on this one. 30% of the US population go to church. In Australia, it's 4.6. 4.6% of the population in Australia will go to church. So when you look at those numbers, you think, okay, 64% self-identify as Christian in the United States, 44% in Australia. That's not that big of a jump. 30% to 4.6%. That's a jump, right? So we have people who claim Christian, a lot of people who would claim to be Christian. But as far as putting feet on the ground, as far as actually doing Christianity, practicing Christianity, you're going to have very, very few individuals. So that's a little bit about the culture, religious culture in Australia. Now we are based in, we're not based there, that's where we are now. We are based in Toowoomba. So if we go across the Pacific Ocean, we head on down to Australia. That's where we are now, we're in Australia. And in the top, the northeast corner there, that's Queensland. That's the state that we are in there, similar in size to the state of Texas. And right in the bottom corner of Queensland is Toowoomba. That's where we're based. I've had a few people comment on the name Toowoomba, as Andy was mentioning it before. It's like, Toowoomba, is that right? We've got a lot of names in Australia, place names in Australia, that come from the native Aboriginal languages that were there. And a lot of them are really fun to say. I really like saying a lot of the names in Australia. We've got Toowoomba there in southeast Queensland. We've got Woolloomooloo in New South Wales. Humpty Doo in the Northern Territory. Wagga Wagga in New South Wales as well. And very close to us, we've got a lovely beach called Mooloolaba. And I really like saying that one. I love to say we're going down to Mooloolaba. So we've got a lot of those names that are kind of fun to say. And what Hannah and I will do sometimes if we're on a road trip, if we're visiting a congregation somewhere, we'll look at some of the road signs and we'll just try and guess how to pronounce some of the names on there. We've got the one up there. I think that's Mullabagilma, and Bayulga. No, but I don't know how to say. That's the problem with some of these names. You'll look at them and you'll try and figure it out, but you'll often be corrected. So you can have a guess at those. If you tell me what it is later, I don't know that I'll be able to tell you that you're right or wrong, because I don't know. We did that once. We were looking at a place in Brisbane, and I kept saying Kapalaba. We're going to Kapalaba, and then someone, one of the locals there, kind of said, "It's Kapalaba, obviously." Anyway, that's some of the place names we have. The place name Toowoomba likely actually comes from the Aboriginal word meaning swamp, which doesn't sound like a very pleasant place to live. It doesn't sound like a very pleasant place to work, but Toowoomba is actually a very nice place. It's the second largest inland city in Australia after Canberra. That's our capital, roughly 80 miles from Brisbane. It has a population of 200,000. That's 150,000 in the city itself, and then 50,000 roughly in the surrounding towns. And it's called the Garden City. The Garden City. And you'll see that's the sign that you see if you come into Toowoomba. You'll have these beautiful flowers coming up. It's called the Garden City because it has over 150 parks and gardens throughout the city. And it is just filled with these beautiful flowers. So you think Toowoomba, you think the swamp. That doesn't sound very pleasant, but the city itself is actually a very nice place. It also has its I guess, claim to fame is the annual Carnival of Flowers that it has, where it has this big parade where it brings all these flowers down, all the main gardens. It has these beautiful displays and these beautiful gardens. It's a really nice place to visit, and I encourage you, if you're interested in the work in Australia, if you're interested in hearing about some of the things that I've been speaking about this morning, I'd invite you to come down, check out Toowoomba. It's really a beautiful place. I got a little bit of a bone to pick. I heard you had Brother Chris Hurd here a while ago, and he was telling you about all the spiders and snakes in Australia and how scary it is to come to Australia. It's not. It's a lovely place. You'll see flowers and gardens. You probably won't see any snakes. And you also won't have the ground open up and swallow you alive like they have in New Zealand. We're also not built on an active volcano. Both New Zealand and Australia, lovely places to go. I encourage you to visit both of them. Toowoomba is also considered the Bible Belt of Australia. So you guys think of the Bible Belt. Is Chattanooga classed as in the Bible Belt? You'd say that? Yeah, it's in the Bible Belt. Toowoomba is the Bible Belt of Australia. Not the same kind of Bible Belt as in the USA, much smaller scale. So I mentioned like in the USA, you've got 56% of your population self-identifying as Christian. That's Toowoomba. 56% as opposed to 44%. And when you look at the people who are actually attending churches, instead of the national 4.6%, we have 8% in Toowoomba. So sure, it's a Bible Belt in that it's a little higher than the national average, but you're still going to have a significant amount of apathy towards religion, even in Toowoomba. But just anecdotally, just in my own experience, just seeing the way people talk about church and people react to the concept of church is very, very different in Toowoomba than it is in other places in Australia. Because even though there's not that many people that are attending church, they're much more open to the idea. They're much more open to the discussion about faith. I remember once in Adelaide when I was getting my hair cut, I was having a chat with the barber. He was telling me about his life. I was telling him about mine. And he asked me, what do you do for work? And I said, oh, I'm a minister down at the church, down there on Knowles Road. And that just killed the conversation. He just was not interested in talking to me anymore. He didn't want to hear from me. He was just like, quickly, cut your hair, take the money, get out of here. That's the sort of thing that happens in other places in Australia. Whereas in Toowoomba, you'll still have some level of apathy, but people are much more open to discussion. They're much more open to talking about religion, or at least thinking about religion. So that is just anecdotally, there's a difference in the culture that is noticeable in Toowoomba that you wouldn't necessarily have in other places in Australia. This is the church building which we attend. This is the Gipp Street Church of Christ. It's based on Gipp Street in Toowoomba. And it was established in the 1960s. And it wasn't brought by missionaries. It wasn't something that came about necessarily as a plant. But it was actually came about because there were three widows in Toowoomba. And they were going from church to church, trying to find the church that they read about in their Bibles. They were well read, they'd read through the scriptures, and then every time they'd go to a church to try and find that church that they read about in the Bible, they'd see all these differences. They'd see, well, they're not doing it the way Paul told Timothy the church is to be conducted. Or they'd say, this church isn't doing it the way Peter spoke about in the book of Acts, or the way Luke wrote about in the book of Acts. They'd just make those observations. And eventually they decided, look, we can't find it anyway, so the three of us, we're going to meet together and we are going to do worship in our own home. Eventually there was a guy from the USA. He worked in oil discovery. He was looking for oil in Australia. And he came across these three widows and he met them and he spoke to them and he found out about what they were doing in their worship. And he realized this is the Lord's church. These three widows are Christians. They are members of the Church of Christ, these three widows. They were meeting together according to the New Testament pattern. So what they did is they wrote back to their home congregation, and their home congregation sent these two missionary families to meet with these widows, and they worked there for a little bit. They were there for a while before they went back home, and then another two families came along, and they helped grow the church, and they helped reach the community. And then eventually in 1976, all the Americans decided to leave Toowoomba, and Toowoomba was under local leadership. It had Australian elders, it had an Australian preacher, and it was thriving and functioning as a New Testament church in Toowoomba. And that all started with these three widows who could not find the New Testament church that they read about in their Bibles. The congregation now has about 80 members, which makes it one of the largest churches of Christ in Australia. It's an average church in Australia has maybe 15 to 30 members. That's what you'd probably say. I think the actual average is 22.8 members in a Church of Christ in Australia. So 80, that's a significant number. So one of the largest churches in Australia. I've mentioned in some of my newsletters that I've written back, I talk about the person I work with, Daniel Smith, and I realized I've written about him and I've told you guys about him, but I've never actually explained anything about who he is. And I've realized that as I've spoken to a few people while I've been here and on the phone, people have very different images of Daniel Smith. Some people picture him as an older man who's kind of helping me and mentoring me, and some picture him as a younger man that I'm helping and mentoring. So I'd like to introduce you to Daniel and his family so you have a bit of an idea about who I'm working with. This is Daniel Smith and his family there. Daniel's been working with the church at Gipp Street for about 8 years, and he's been doing a great job there. That's his wife. Confusingly, her name is Hannah, so a little bit of confusion there. And even more confusing, I grew up with Hannah in Tasmania, so we went to the same church, so a little bit of confusion there. And those are their two boys, Oliver, who Hannah is holding, that's their oldest, and their second son is Franklin. You can tell by his expression that he's got a bit of an attitude to him. We like to call him Cranky Frankie. So that's the Smith family there. So Daniel's been working there for 8 years, and the Toowoomba work in Toowoomba with Daniel was going really well. It was thriving, but Daniel was very much getting overwhelmed with the amount of work he had. So he reached out to me and asked if I would consider moving up to Toowoomba. We'd been looking for work for a little while, and he reached out. He was getting overwhelmed. He asked if I'd be interested in working alongside him. And we came up there, visited with the church. We fell in love with the church there and the members, and we came up to work alongside them at Toowoomba. But me coming to Toowoomba was not just about giving Daniel a break. It was about having the opportunity to do even more in Toowoomba. Not just in Toowoomba, but even more throughout the whole work in Australia, helping grow and strengthen the church. So before I get into specifically some of what I've been doing and the work that I've been up to, are there any thoughts, questions, or comments about the work in Australia, the work at Gipp Street, or anything about Daniel and his family, or my family? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, we do have electricity. So we do have. We live in a town just west of Toowoomba. We live in a little town called Oakey. And it's a small military town. It's built on an army base, and yeah, we live in a 3-bedroom house, fairly small 3-bedroom house on a small bit of land. We're in the town. We're not like in the country or anything, but we're a part of the town there in Oakey. Yeah, absolutely. You think of mission work, often we think of places like Africa, South America, places like that where there's, there's destitution, there's difficulty in these areas. And that's a really good point, because when we think of mission work, often we think of in terms of people who are hungry, people who are struggling with physical needs. And this hopefully serves as a reminder that there are places in the world that need Jesus, even though they've got all of the modern luxuries. There was a missionary who came to Australia once, an American missionary, and he said, as they were leaving, I think it was Brisbane Airport, as soon as you leave Brisbane Airport, there's a McDonald's right there, a McDonald's restaurant. And he said, "You've got McDonald's, why do you need missionaries?" And the thought behind it is, if you've got this affluence, if you've got this Western culture that exists ingrained into your society here, why do you need to send people to preach the gospel? It's because even affluent societies, even Western cultures, even areas like that, they still need Jesus. They still reject Jesus in many parts of these worlds, so a lot of them still need missionaries. Sorry, I ranted a little bit there. I got into preacher mode. Any other thoughts or questions? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, absolutely. So we do have the Lord's Supper every Sunday, baptism for the remission of sins, male leadership. Eldership is the goal. We don't have elders at Gipp Street at the moment, but yeah, we do ascribe to the qualifications in 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1. And certainly we are, this is another thing that's interesting. If you were to go to Australia, and if you were to get on your phone and Google Church of Christ, and say, all right, I'll go to that one, you will likely find there is a large denomination in Australia called the Church of Christ that has female leadership, musical instruments, all those sorts of things. And you'll be like, hang on, I thought this was Church of Christ, but this feels like a Baptist church. That is because in Australia, the Restoration movement, very similar to the church in the USA, it grew in Australia. There's a bit of history there. A guy called Thomas McGarry. He was from New Zealand. He came over to Australia, and he independently, through reading of his scriptures, he left the Scotch Baptist Church and decided to follow the New Testament pattern. But as it progressed and as the church went on, it eventually decided to associate. It eventually decided to create an association. They said, we're not a denomination, we're an association, and we're going to have this conference and this leadership group, and we're going to vote on things. So it's a denomination. You're just calling it by a different name. And they kept the name Church of Christ. So I think it's similar to the Christian church here in the USA, or one of those ones. Comes from the background of the Restoration movement, but doesn't practice anymore any of the fundamental restoration principles. So sometimes in Australia, if you just search Church of Christ, you're going to find that. My recommendation, if you are going to come to Australia, get in contact with someone from the church that you know who practice according to the New Testament pattern. I invite you to contact me, get in touch with the elders here, or with Jack or Andy, or John and Becky. They've all got my contact details. Get in touch with me if you're going to come to Australia to any part, and I'll get you in touch with a local church that is going to fit that pattern. Go ahead. That is an excellent question. Let me get into my next. I'm going to use that as my segue to get into what I've been doing. So, excellent question. So my role specifically, what I've been doing at the work at Gipp Street, is not just locally in Gipp Street. That's some of the work I've been doing. I do share the pulpit with Daniel. Daniel and I go roughly 50% each a year in the teaching. We do series by series, so we don't do like he does one lesson, I do the next, he does one, I do the next. He'll do something like he recently went through the I am statements of Jesus, and then after that I did 3 lessons on the book of Haggai, and then we'll do it that way. So we're still doing series by series. There's still continuity, but we do roughly 50% of the preaching. Like many churches, we live stream our services for those who can't make it. I will get to your question in a moment. I'm just going to build up to it a little bit here. We do a live stream. Like many churches, there's obviously pros and cons to live streaming. Live streaming is good because it helps people who can't attend to reach out to them, but it sometimes has a drawback in that it reaches people who can attend but don't necessarily want to, and maybe gives them an out. So we understand there's pros and cons to that. The reason we do it is because there are churches across Australia who don't have someone there who can do the work of ministry. They don't have someone there who's equipped to preach. They don't have someone there who's able to be involved in leading worship. So we use the stream to reach these congregations all over the country, especially isolated Christians who don't have a church nearby. So there's some congregations who don't have leaders. There's some families who live in areas that are 5 hours away from the nearest Church of Christ. It's very, very difficult for these people, and they're very isolated in those areas. So we use the live stream to reach out to them. Our live stream usually has 100 to 120 views. Some of those are people watching the lesson. There we go, there's a live stream. Some people do tune in from the United States, but it's not on a Sunday, so you get like a little bonus lesson on a, what would it be over here? Yeah, Saturday afternoon, I guess. So if you want to tune in to us on a Saturday afternoon and hear a lesson before you come to church, feel free to listen to the Gipp Street Church of Christ. You'll have either myself or Daniel. But we also reach out to those congregations who use our lessons, people who have families who don't have a church to go to. That's probably the biggest issue with the church in Australia, is this sort of isolation that exists with a lot of these congregations. There are people who live in certain parts of Australia who are small churches or no church at all, and they are isolated, and it's very difficult for them to get the benefit of fellowship. It's very difficult for them to get the benefit of preaching, of hearing God's word. So a lot of what we do is to try and help these churches and congregations. One of the events we put on is we have a lectureship. This is one of the last lectureships that are still running in Australia. I think there's only four churches that do lectureships in the whole country. I'm not entirely sure of that number, but of what I know of, there are four. We're going to be doing this one this year in October on the greatest commands, on Jesus' greatest commands there. We also have what we started this year. This is the ACTS program, Australian Christians Training for Service. What this is a way to help some of these congregations who are not equipped to teach, who are not equipped for the work of ministry, but also are not able to stop what they're doing and stop working and come to America and go to a preaching school. That's a great thing to do. That's what I did. But not everyone's able to do that. What the ACTS program is a way that people can, while staying in their job, they can do a part-time program. And it's not necessarily a how to be a preacher program. It's how to equip you for the work of service in the church. How to be a active member in a church that doesn't necessarily have elders, it doesn't have deacons, it doesn't have a preacher, it doesn't have anyone coordinating or helping or doing these sorts of things. We're trying to fill that void there to help people, give them the skills and knowledge to better serve in God's kingdom. There's a quick look at the program there. It's a one-year program, one-year part-time program. It has 4 modules that are done online. So they just meet online from wherever they are in Australia, because we've got people as far north as Rockhampton, Queensland, which is the north point of Queensland, all the way down to Hobart, Tasmania. So all the way up and down the east coast of Australia, we have these students who are meeting together for this program. Right there on the second row there, we have, this is the work that Toowoomba is mainly involved in, the work that myself and Daniel were working on, is the Preparing a Bible Lesson. That is an in-person module. So people travel from their homes and they come down to Toowoomba, and we did a 3-day workshop on how to prepare a Bible lesson. We didn't go into the details, the huge details of exegesis. We're not training preachers, but what we are trying to do is help people go from, I've read a text in my Bible, and I want to do a lesson on it. How am I going to put that down on paper, and how am I going to present it? So we did that over a 3-day workshop. We had our 12 students come along. We had men and women, so we adapted it for how to do ladies' classes and kids' Bible classes and things like that for the ladies. And then we also just did the principles that anyone would be able to use to take a Bible and be able to preach a lesson from it or teach a lesson from it in whatever context they're in. You'll notice there we've got Brother Will Hanstein. He just happened to be in Australia at the same time. He's the director of the Southeast Institute of Biblical Studies. He just happened to be in Australia at the time, and I thought it would be real weird to have the guy who taught me preaching sit in on some of my lessons on how to prepare a Bible lesson. So I I put him to work and gave him a few lessons to do as well. That's what we're doing. We also use a lot of our resources to help smaller congregations who are struggling with a lack of resources. So that's a major part. And I hope you're seeing the theme here, that what I'm trying to do and what the work that I'm involved in particularly is trying to reach out and help smaller congregations, not just the church at Gibbs Street. So we have, if you'll see there, you probably can't see it very well, but there's a lot of congregations along there. You'll see Toowoomba, that's the large one, that's where we are. But we also have a lot of congregations around us that do not have the resources to be able to do the things that we're doing. I mentioned earlier, Australian congregations usually do not have elders. They usually do not have deacons. They usually do not have full-time workers. Usually what they have is one, maybe two guys who are working a secular job, and they are taking upon themselves all the administrative work, all the preaching work, all the worship roles, and everything there is to do with the running and functioning of a church. Does that mean I have 5 minutes left, or is that time? Oh, okay, cool. All right, let's get through this. They're just not equipped for leadership. They're not equipped for those sorts of things, but they're doing all this work, and that is exhausting. They're not always able to keep that up. So what we do at Toowoomba is we will try and get around to these churches in the Gold Coast, in Ipswich, Morayfield, Caloundra, and we will come and provide regular preaching support. So I will go to these churches and I will help them and give them support. It's important that when we do this, we're not trying to overstep. We're not trying to create an association or anything like that. We're not trying to take away from their autonomy or their independence. What we're trying to do is help them, give them a break, but we're also trying to equip them and strengthen them for them to be able to stand on their own, for them to be able to grow on their own. Sorry, go ahead. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And these questions are great because it's really leading me to the point I'm getting to. So I do appreciate that. Because we have in fact heard from some of these congregations who use our live stream. Some of them don't, or they're not able to, or they don't. You'll see up right at the top there's a place called Delulu. They really struggle. Delulu is not a place that has all of the resources and the technological advances that we have. They still have electricity and things like this, but they don't have very good internet. They don't necessarily have access to live stream, and it's a bit trickier for them to take advantage of some of the things that we're doing. They are involved in the ACTS program, but dealing with them is a little requires a few other things. Our current goal at the moment, what we're trying to do, and this is the need that we have right now, as well as how we want to reach these congregations who we're unable to reach with other means. What we're trying to do is we're trying to work towards a 12-seater bus so that we can send teams of people to help these congregations and not just reach the churches, but also reach the communities in these areas. What a lot of these congregations, like I mentioned Delulu, that's an 8-hour drive from where we are in Toowoomba. As much as I'd love to, I can't get in the car, drive 8 hours, do a lesson, and then drive eight hours back home to Toowoomba. As much as I'd love to be able to do that, that's just something we're not able to be involved in right now. So what we'd really like to do is help these congregations, not just with the one-off sermon, but a lot of them have reached out to us and asked, you guys have the manpower. You've got 80 members at that church, and you guys can do a campaign. You guys can do a gospel meeting. What they're really after is getting teams of people up there to help run a campaign, do an event, help encourage these people who are isolated and disconnected from the rest of the church, and to help them in these areas. We want to regularly take workers and preachers to even more regional congregations than we're currently doing. We want to connect and encourage Christians in isolated areas. Like, one of the things it's difficult to wrap our heads around, the kind of isolation that these Christians are facing. They are there sometimes only with their own family, and that is all the fellowship they get. So I think sometimes we take for granted the enjoyment and the blessing of it is to meet together as the saints on the first day of the week and to enjoy the fellowship and the common union that we have in Christ Jesus. They don't get that every Sunday. They sometimes sit around in their homes. They might put on the TV and watch myself or Daniel do a lesson, but they don't have the fellowship. They're isolated, and we really want to help connect and encourage these Christians. We want to equip these smaller congregations to reach the lost, both with the manpower that we have, as well as helping them, strengthening them, and training them in how to reach the lost in their areas. And we also want to involve young people in our work. We have a few young people in our church, and it would be really great to be able to use a 12-seater bus or something like this to get them, to help them engage in door knocking and be the next generation of the church and help equip them for the work of ministry and for the work of the church. That's what we're trying to do at the moment. That is our current goal. That is our current need. That's me done. All right. What I'm trying to do at the moment is just go around, mention the work that we've got going on, and talk about our current need. If you do have any questions or anything like that, please come and see me during this break. I'm happy to talk about that. Let's close now in a word of prayer. Do you close in a word? Okay, I'll do it now anyway. All right, let's pray. Dear Heavenly and Holy Father, we thank you. We're thankful for this day you've blessed us with. We're thankful for this wonderful opportunity to gather with the saints. We know that many places in the world, many places in Australia, and perhaps even here in the United States, there are people who are isolated and disconnected from the church. So we're thankful for this opportunity to meet with our brethren, to meet together as the saints, to enjoy one another's company, and to enjoy the common union that we share through the blood of your Son, Jesus Christ. We pray that you will help us now as we continue into the worship hour. We pray these things in his name. Amen.